And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says Parliament has missed an opportunity for a meaningful vote. This after MPs decided to delay his Brexit deal. Johnson indicating this afternoon that despite defeat, Parliament will introduce legislation next week in the hope of striking a deal with the EU by the end of this month.
The opportunity to have a meaningful vote has effectively been passed up because the meaningful vote has been voided of meaning. But I wish the House to know that I'm not daunted or dismayed by this particular result, and I think it probably became likely once it was obvious that the amendment from my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, was going to remain on the order paper. I continue in the very strong belief that the best thing for the UK and for the whole of Europe is for us to leave with this new deal on October the 31st. And to anticipate the questions that are coming from the benches opposite, I will not negotiate a delay with the EU. And neither does the law compel me to do so. I will tell our friends and colleagues in the EU exactly what I have told everyone in the last 88 days that I've served as Prime Minister, that further delay would be bad for this country, bad for our European Union, and bad for democracy. So next week, the government will introduce the legislation needed for us to leave the EU with our new deal on October the 31st.
Stay with Brexit and go live to London now, where our correspondent Ollie Barrett is standing by. And Ollie, this is by no means Boris Johnson's first taste of defeat as Prime Minister during a short stint. How big a setback is this?
Well, there are various ways of looking at what has happened here in London today. Certainly this is an extra hurdle that has been placed in front of Boris Johnson and his Brexit strategy. The legislation that has passed today, the amendment that was voted in favour of, requires him to ask for an extension from the European Union to the Brexit process, and it also effectively holds back on approval for his Brexit deal until the surrounding legislation has been agreed as well. Now, Boris Johnson insists that legislation will come before the House of Commons next week. There will be a meaningful vote on his Brexit deal next week as well. We think that will take place now on Monday. And one key thing that did happen today in the voting on the amendment that has been placed in front of Boris Johnson as that obstacle I was describing, it does show, though, if you add up the numbers of MPs who back that, who say they will actually also back Boris Johnson's deal, it demonstrates that he does have what appears to be a majority now in the House of Commons for his Brexit deal. So add that to the fact that he says he will not be asking the European Union for a Brexit delay. Add that to the fact that France has come out since the vote and says a Brexit delay would be in nobody's interest. It may actually be that despite this not going according to plan for Boris Johnson today, it may be that actually he has taken a few steps closer to delivering the Brexit he's always promised on October the 31st.
Where then do the flaws in this latest deal agreed by Johnson and the EU earlier in the week lie for the opposition? What are they not willing to support?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, insists that this deal is worse than the deal that Theresa May had rejected 3 times by the House of Commons. The opposition Labour Party want Britain to be in the European Customs Union. Boris Johnson's deal takes the UK out of that customs union, and the opposition Labour Party insists that would be very bad for manufacturing, for example, here in Britain. They point to car makers who say the way we put our cars together, the just-in-time manufacturing process, parts coming from all over the world, particularly all parts of the European Union, that's going to be very difficult for us to do business. Now, at the same time, it is very clear that the position the opposition Labour Party is taking is partly also about politics. They don't want Boris Johnson to deliver the Brexit deal that he said he would. They don't want Boris Johnson to go into a looming general election as the victor when it comes to Brexit, or at least portraying himself as that. So there's a huge amount of politics at play as well.
And as all of that plays out then in the House of Commons, we've also seen the thousands of demonstrators out on the streets of London this afternoon, making it clear that they too reject this latest deal.
That's right. This has been another demonstration. Tens of thousands of people in the British capital saying that they want a second referendum on all of this. That chance really seems to be vanishing from them day by day at the moment. It certainly does feel here in London like Boris Johnson's government have picked up some momentum when it comes to Brexit. So the atmosphere has been slightly different today, I think it's fair to say, from the demonstrators here in London. They remain completely committed to the idea that Britain should stay in the European Union, but I think many of them do feel that perhaps the possibility of that is beginning to slip away. Now, politics can change very quickly, lightningly fast in the UK at the moment, so certainly nothing should be taken for granted at this point when it comes to Boris Johnson's government, but he will hope that within the next week or so, Britain has taken further steps towards leaving the EU on October the 31st. Something that the demonstrators on the streets of London today say would be catastrophic for Britain.
We're seeing this strong showing as far as people who are opposed to the Brexit deal by Boris Johnson, Ollie. But as with the initial Brexit vote, the reality is the margins were quite tight then, as they were tight in the session today by the members of Parliament. So it would not be guaranteed, would it, that should there be a vote tomorrow on this issue, there would be an outright rejection of Brexit?
No, that's right. If there were to be a second referendum, the polls do suggest that at the moment there is a majority potentially for the Remain side. But Brexiteers will say to you, those polls showed the same thing before the 2016 referendum. We've also had polling recently, since Boris Johnson won his deal from the European Union, that suggests that actually a majority of Britons would rather that this deal now went through than that the Brexit process was further delayed. Now, all of these polls should be taken with a pinch of salt. Really hard to assess where the mood of Britain is. It changes frequently. And certainly one thing we can be sure of is that there's been a great deal of frustration among Britons about the way this place operates. The House of Commons behind me, 3 and a bit years on from the referendum, still not decided whether Britain is leaving the European Union or not. October the 31st remains the date as it stands, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility that that could slip again. Even if Boris Johnson does get his deal through, he may still need to apply at some point for a short technical extension. So, as I say, 3 and a bit years on from the referendum, many Britons really frustrated and bored of the whole process.
Ollie Barrett live in London. No doubt much more coverage on the Brexit crisis over the coming days and possibly even the coming months. Thank you for now.